Hi, I'm Norm Pattiz. You're watching Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Hi, I'm Brian Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Today I'm here at Norm Pattiz headquarters, also known as PodcastOne, among other things. Norm, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I usually ask my guests, how'd you get this job?
Like I got my last job, I thought it up.
For those who don't know about you, your history and PodcastOne, break it down for us.
Well, we're fond of saying PodcastOne was 40 years in the making.
PodcastOne.com. PodcastOne.com. America's Podcast Network. Adam Carolla, Shaquille O'Neal, Steve Austin, The Chive, Chris Jericho, Dan Patrick, Brandi Glanville, Jay Moore, and over 200 more of your favorites. Rob has a podcast. Barstool Sports, Bulletproof, Ben Greenfield, Art of Charm, Dr. Drew, Penn Jillette, Bill Hendry, Laura Ingram. Which brings us back to Adam Carolla.
I think a lot of the attention that podcasts started getting was when we went into the business. Podcasting looked to me like Westwood One for the digital age. And when we made the move to form a partnership and actually go in and represent the podcast that Kit had been representing, and since Westwood One was a producer of programming, not just a distributor, we started producing our own programming. And at that point, we needed to build a company that had the kind of infrastructure so that we could go to national advertisers and tell them what a great opportunity this was and what they were missing. And if the evangelism was working, we needed to be big enough so that whatever they wanted in the podcasting arena, we could provide for them.
Yeah, I mean, same kind of rodeo, different bull riders.
I've never really quite thought of it that way, but I get it now.
Yeah. And so, I would imagine it wasn't much of a transition or a stretch from you. It just seems like, same kind of content format in a large distribution platform, right. Now just really tailored for a digital audience, and off you go.
Yeah, it didn't have, the thing that I really liked about it is it didn't have the formatic constraints of radio. In radio, you have to make sure that whatever programming you supply fits with the format of the radio station. If it's a top 40 radio station, you gotta put on programming that's compatible with the audience that will listen to that station. Country, urban, talk stations, a news station. But this, if it'll grab an audience, there's no subject that you can't deal with. Fast
forward to today, who's some of your lineup and your standouts? Well,
we've got we have 200 podcasts on our network, and some of the ones that people would probably be the most familiar with, Adam Carolla, who is clearly the platinum standard of delivering audience and generating revenue.
Doesn't he hold the Guinness Book of World Records?
Yeah, he is in the Guinness Book of Records as the most downloaded podcaster of all time.
Amazing. Yeah. Interesting guy too. Super, looks can be deceiving, right? You certainly can't judge that book by the cover. He's a real casual guy, sometimes a little grumpy.
You think so?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But super knowledgeable about lots of different things. He's sort of a journeyman, right?
Where's my camera? Oh, there's only one camera? Okay, so that's my camera? Just say it's my camera then. Don't be condescending. The most annoying Super Bowl party guests are me, because I go to Kimmel's every year. He's got a big old bar. I drink those Moscow mules, I get lit up, and at a certain point, I do this. Because the whole time I'm sitting there going, don't say anything to Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. By the way, we don't need a cocktail named after a city in Russia. I figure the whole place is just Faceville, right? Like everyone there's drunk. You're almost just inciting more alcoholism amongst the group of people who does the most drinking on the planet. But anyway, I go there, have about 18 Moscow mules, and then I see Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, and I go over there and I do that move where I tell them how much I loved Good Will Hunting, and then I look at Ben and I go, Batman versus Superman? Oh, please. And then I go and find a potted plant to vomit into.
Yeah, he's such an interesting character, and he's been so successful in the medium.
a lot of people who watch this show, they're entrepreneurs and they're thinking about having their own podcast, or maybe they've already got it and they're trying to get it off the ground. What do you think, in Adam's case, what do you think it makes so compelling?
Well, I think the time was right for Adam to leave radio and go digital. The kind of program that he put on was not the kind of program that was easily found in the podcast world. He basically put on a morning show, and he had enough of an audience that followed him in radio that they followed him on over into podcasting, and he's continued to build it ever since. I mean, it takes a particular kind of talent to be able to do that kind of radio show. And Adam can do 20 minutes on anything.
I mean, to me, he's kind of like the Howard Stern of his generation. Like he can talk to anyone, he can talk about anything, and it's just amazing how the depth and breadth of his sort of knowledge base goes.
Well, to me, he's better than Howard Stern. Howard has an audience, which used to be like 14-year-old boys, and now as we've all gotten older. But I think Adam speaks to more groups and about more things because he's involved in more things. He not only does his daily radio show, but he does 5 specialty podcasts, 1-hour podcasts, every week. Yeah. He does one with Mark Garagos, where they talk about legal things. He does one, of course, with Dr. Drew, where they continue the tradition that they started in Loveline.
Yeah. And at one point, you owned that show, right?
I did. Yeah. I did. I'm back. I didn't own it when we greenlit the program at Westwood One many years ago, but when I left and started doing this, I took over ownership of the Loveline program. So we stayed, and still are to a very small degree, in the network radio business because we have the Laura Ingraham Show, which airs on about 230 stations, I think.
Yeah, and Loveline's amazing. I mean, it's an amazing anomaly, I guess, because, I guess like great shows, they have long legs. But this one, I mean, wasn't it 25 or 30 years? It just recently ended, just a few years ago, right?
Well, it ended in the incarnation that we were involved with. It's back on the air. It's a very different program. CBS has it on the air. It's a very different program. But Loveline was on the air for nearly 40 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I was just thinking, back when I was a teenager, I started listening to it on K-Rock and loved it then. Yeah. Yeah, great.
And we carried it on demand, as a podcast. And frankly, the audience for the podcast was larger than the audience for the network radio show because the audience had grown older. And as you grow older, you're less likely to want to listen to something when it's actually on. You're more interested in listening to it when you have the time to listen to it. Yeah. And that's the beauty of podcasting.
Well, that's interesting too. So let's break that down a little bit too. So the on-demand model, or this podcast model, having it go wide and far, is about the aggregate for you. You see, the 200 plus shows, right? Have you been experimenting with long form and short form? Like, what's working? Is it typically a 30-minute show that gets the most traction, or a 1-hour show? Or
most of our shows are around an hour in length, but we have shows that are 20 minutes. We have shows that are half an hour. Yeah. Our rule is do the show as long as it's good. I mean, if it's a good show for 45 minutes, end it. If it goes on and it feels like it's a good show for an hour and 15 minutes, keep going. And if it's a good show for a couple of hours, then it's a 2-parter, So we like the creative freedom that podcasting allows. And we also like the wide variety of programming that you would never find on a radio station, that you can find on demand at PodcastOne.com.
So you've also got people like Steve Austin, right? Yeah. What's Steve's show like? Steve is great.
When I'll tell a little story about this one. When we decided to do this, to start Podcast One, I'm a big Laker fan, and I've been sitting courtside at Laker games for 35 years. There's 8 seats between the scores table and the Laker bench. 4 of them are mine, and 4 of them belong to Ari Emanuel. And if you're in the entertainment business, you know who Ari Emanuel is. But I was telling him, since he owns and runs the largest talent agency and sports agency, in the world, I was telling him what I was getting ready to do. He says, that sounds interesting. Why don't I put a few of my, team together and come on over and tell them what you're doing? So we went over there and we told them what we were going to do. And I came back to my office, and 3 hours later, I got a call from Peter Benedict from UTA, United Talent, which is right around the corner from where we are right now. And he said, I hear you were over at Ari's. And I thought, boy, that these guys have their information network. He said, what were you talking about? He said, better yet, why don't you walk around the corner and tell us? And we told him. And what we discovered was there were, in the talent agency business, they were looking for digital solutions for their client base. And what we were talking about was a very easy to understand digital solution that fit very well with all of the other things that they were doing in motion pictures, television, publishing, music, blah, blah, blah. And so the reason I mentioned all of that was UTA brought us Steve Austin, which was the first program that we produced ourselves. And, I knew a little bit about the WWE, but not much. And I had heard of Steve Austin, but I really didn't know him. And he came over, and he was a prince of a guy. And he just seemed like, in our conversation, it was interesting as hell. So we put on the Steve Austin show, where he brought over, a lot of his pals from the wrestling world and talked for an hour and a half. And we took a look, and there were 500,000 or 600,000 listeners per episode. Wow. So we then did another show with Steve and another show with Steve. And that turned out to be, our first successful franchise. But, we've added many, many, many more in the ensuing years.
Talk to us about how you find audience and how you match those audiences up with the advertisers. With 200 shows, I would assume it's very eclectic, from A to Z, right? And from Steve Austin to Adam Carolla. And
to some NPR programs.
Yeah. So talk to us about these audiences, how they differ or how they're the same or overlap, and then how you match them up with audiences and advertisers.
Well, let me start with the last one first, which is the importance to advertisers. I'm fond of saying that if television has 1 million viewers and radio has 1 million listeners, and I've got 1 million people consuming a podcast, that my million is worth more than anybody else's, because my million had to perform a positive act to get there in the first place.
The download.
Exactly. They have to. It's very simple now, but they have to physically do something to listen to that show. So there's a much better chance that that audience is what we call the P1 listener. That's what we used to call it in radio, especially for music listeners. But if that's the P1 listener that we used to think of in radio and podcasting, it's the triple P1, because these are the fans. These are the people who will find that show no matter what platform it's on. And we just have to let people know who aren't the primary fans that it's out there and how they can find it as well. And with our 200 some podcasts in the last 12 months, our shows have been downloaded over 1,500,000,000 times. And so if we promote, which we do constantly, to our own audience, it's very likely that anybody who's ever listened to a podcast is going to find out about something new that we're putting on the air. Yeah. So if you take the fan base of the personality or the subject matter, and you match it with the constant promotion that we give it on our network, along with the social media that comes from the personality and comes from us, it's not hard to let people know that it's out there. Yeah. What's hard, of course, is making them come back for the second episode.
I think there's some good lessons there I want to underscore, and one of them is, the advantage of digital, right, versus TV is, it's measurable. Like you said, right. They have to download it, and so you can count. But beyond the vanity metrics of how many downloads, I think probably what would be most interesting to these advertisers is the level of engagement. Right? These people are engaged, and then the ability to sort of cross-promote. You have, I don't want to, maybe it's a wrong analogy, but I think of fish in a barrel. You have a captive audience, and you're fishing for them, offering them great value. It's like, if you love Steve Austin, you're going to love Adam's thing, so try it out.
Or you ought to be listening to Chris Jericho.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so you're just building this. And so what's the model? How does the advertising work? Is it a pre-roll? Is it a sponsor a show? If I'm an advertiser, talk to me. How do I get involved with PodcastOne?
Well, give us a call. But we know most of the advertisers. We've got a fairly large sales department in New York. We've got a couple of people in Chicago. We've got one in Dallas, and we have 5 people here in Los Angeles. So we're out there covering all the bases.
Maybe I should ask, what kind of brand do you think matches up with your audience or your audience's best?
They all do, because they're so different that we have something that will fit for almost every category that you can think of. When we got into the business, podcasting was very male and kind of a 25 to 54 medium. So older men. Now, since we know what advertisers are looking for, we control the demographics of our network by the programs that we produce to put in our lineup. So now we have many more women, we have programs that deliver a much younger audience, and probably most importantly, we provide advertisers with metrics that make them feel comfortable about the size of the audience and that they're getting what they're paying for. We can literally supply it in any form that they want. We can supply them with raw downloads, filtered downloads the way we filter them. We can give them survey data from Edison Research. We can put a tracking pixel on the ad and count the number of impressions that are delivered when the ad is served. Now, some people might say, well, if it's an embedded ad, which is kind of in-program content, and it's downloaded and listened to later, how can you count that? Well, you can't. But what we do is, since 75% of our consumption right now is mobile, and people are consuming it right here, and they're consuming it as an active stream, the lion's share of our consumption is as they're listening. And if it's as they're listening and we have a tracking pixel, we can get those numbers for 75% of our audience, and we just project the rest of it across the balance.
Give some direct advice to creators, people who have a story to tell or possible podcast. I mean, first of all, where is the white space? This year, podcasts are more popular than ever, right? And so videos on YouTube or anything else that's sort of reached capacity, it's becoming a little bit oversaturated, but maybe not. I mean, where do you think the white space is right now in podcasting?
It's not so much white space in terms of content. It's white space in terms of revenue. So we're still a very small business. Okay, I mean, the business is probably twice as big as it was 2 years ago, and it's predicted to be 4 or 5 times as big as it is today, maybe as soon as next year, or certainly the year after. But that doesn't mean that we have generated enough interest and support in the medium that all of us that are in this business are sold out. We're not. So it's really finding the advertisers and finding out what they need and trying to fill that hole, because that's where we generate our revenue.
So why isn't it where it maybe ought to be? Why is there still plenty of room for growth? Why aren't more advertisers jumping into this?
It's new. When I started Westwood One years ago, I started it with one show in one office in Westwood. And my first year in business, we did $250,000 on that one show. Several years later, we were generating about $600 million. And when we took it public, the company wound up with a market cap at its peak of about $4 billion. And that was a long time ago. But nobody was buying syndicated radio. We had to go out and evangelize. We had to prove that it was worthwhile. We had to draw the comparisons and make the connection between syndicated radio and network radio as it existed at the time. We're going through the same thing right now. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at the growth pattern of our company right now, in its 4 years of having annual revenues, it's almost exactly what Westwood One was.
So you have a roadmap.
Oh yeah, we have a promotional piece that says PodcastOne 40 years in the making.
That's awesome. Now let's maybe get personal and talk to some of these creators and maybe offer them some words of wisdom, some advice. What would you say to creators who maybe they've got this great idea, or maybe they're trying their podcast and it's, they're trying to get off the ground? What would you say to them?
Well, I think what they have to do is they have to take stock of what they're able to do themselves. Just because you produce a podcast that delivers an audience doesn't mean you know how to market it, doesn't mean you know how to promote it, certainly doesn't mean that you know how to sell it to an advertiser, and how you need to supply all the support that's necessary to sell it to an advertiser. You can't sell it to an advertiser if you don't know how to bill them. You can't sell it to an advertiser if they don't have someplace to send the money. You need to account for it. You need to make deals with your producer partners and spread the money around. Those are all high class problems, but it takes a while to be able to do that. The one advantage that we've had is exactly the same as what we did at Westwood One. A lot of the people that are here came from there, and the rest of the people who are here are 12 years old. So, we're a small company. Our extension list isn't by last name, it's by first name. So it's an interesting place to be. If you've got a program that you think creatively fills the bill, then I would think what you ought to be looking for is the right platform to distribute that program to audience, and a revenue generating solution and a promotional solution that will allow you to monetize that podcast. That's what we've built over here, not only for people who are producing podcasts right now who want us to represent them, but most especially for the stuff we're producing ourselves. We know what it's like to be a producer because we are producers. And, we sell the represented programming the same way we sell the owned and operated programming. And the deals are pretty much the same. So, so far so good.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the F word, failure, or maybe even fear of failure. You can lump them together.
Sure.
In part, like I said, a lot of people watch this show. They're trying to do their own thing. They look at people like you as mentors, pioneers who paved the way. Give us an idea. Give us some advice. Talk to us about some of the missteps that you got wrong in order to get right.
Well, I made all my missteps at Westwood One, okay? Because I wasn't even a radio guy. I came from the television business, but I was sort of unceremoniously dispatched as the sales manager of a local television station in Los Angeles and replaced by the new general manager's younger brother. It was right before I was getting married. There was, if we hadn't worked fast, there would have been one noticeably empty table at my wedding. And when I went off to, on our honeymoon, I started thinking about what I was going to do. And this opportunity came up because I knew a local radio station was producing a 48-hour Motown weekend. And I thought, that might be good syndicated, offered to a radio station, maybe not as 48 hours, but maybe as 24, that they could break up in segments and run over a week, run as a weekend, run over a month. And I went about going out and finding advertisers who had relationships with. But if you don't know the rules, and there were no rules because this was a new medium, if you don't know those rules, you can't be limited by them. So for instance, I didn't know that you don't put what is primarily a black or urban radio program on top 40 radio stations, which are lily white. Well, I never thought of Motown music as black or white. I thought of it as popular music. So when I went out to get radio stations to carry the show, 50% of them were top 40 radio stations, 50% of them were urban radio stations, and I was able to sell that audience to a few advertisers that I knew, from my previous life in television. So, if I was to say one thing to people who were starting out, don't be afraid to be fearful. There's always fear of failure. And especially, back when I started Westwood One, I didn't have a lot of money. I mean, and I didn't raise any money. I had $10,000 and a working wife. And every show had to be successful or I was out of business. So they were. Now in starting PodcastOne, things are different. I have resources, so I know I was originally the sole investor. It was my money. Had I lost it all, I wouldn't have been happy, but it wouldn't have really changed my life. So the pressure and the fear of failure wasn't as great. But the attention that I got was even greater than at Westwood One, because it was sort of Norm Pattiz Act 2 for the digital age. And it got a lot of people interested in it, wanted to know what was going on. And so, we've been able to benefit by that. But my advice would be, don't worry, don't be afraid to take chances. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Don't worry about them, learn from them. And I think, if you've got the goods, you'll come out fine.
You think entrepreneurs are born or are they made? It seems like, it's in your DNA to take chances. I mean, that was kind of a big deal. I think, I don't know how it gets in your DNA. It's probably, through your life experiences, what kind of a childhood you had, what your influences were, who you hung around with. But I wasn't obsessed by going into business by myself. I was obsessed at not getting fired again. And I thought, well, if I work for myself, I can't get fired, But that doesn't mean that I'm going to get the clients that I need to be successful. I mean, my first 3 advertisers, if one of them had a cold, Norm Pattiz was on a plane with a box of Kleenex, Old-fashioned hustle.
Exactly, or what Mark Cuban would call grinding, And it's a lot easier to do business with friends than it is acquaintances. So if your friends respect your knowledge of your subject, then you've got a friendship that will benefit you in business.
Well, that's another great business lesson, a little nugget. I don't want it to go overlooked. What Norm's talking about is, building relationships first, not building business first. Seeing where there's a need and going after it and meeting that need. But also, it's about relationships. So, big fan of the Lakers, you are. Talk to us. We talked off camera about your favorite Laker. Tell me a little bit about your story with your favorite Laker.
Well, my favorite Laker is Shaq. Okay, and the reason is, I'm not wearing it today, but I got a bunch of championship rings that he gave me. If you're a player, you can have a few extra rings made up for friends and family. And so, you got to love a guy who gets you a championship ring.
Yeah, how'd you guys become buddies?
I was sitting right next to him on the bench, and I used to travel to some games, and during the playoffs, I always traveled. So where you get to know these guys is on the road, because you stay in the same hotels, you eat in the same restaurants, you strike up conversations because there's downtime, and you get to know them. And Shaq is a very easy guy to get to know. He's just he's a people person, and you can tell it from the word go. So we struck up a relationship, and it was good. And about 2.5 years ago, I convinced him to do a podcast, which is very, very successful today.
That's great.
And so I see him all the time. Relationships are funny things. if you can keep a relationship that you may have started while you were in business, but now you're no longer in business, you should continue to keep that relationship, not because you have an idea that you're going to do something in business with them again, but if you liked them, you liked them. I had dinner with Bill O'Reilly last night. Okay, I haven't been doing any business with Bill O'Reilly since I left Westwood One, but we had a lovely dinner. Stay in touch, and I've met just a lot of really, really wonderful people. I won't say that every now and then we run into a diva or two, or somebody who is not necessarily looking for friendship's sake, and when the friendship ends, so does the relationship. I mean, that just happens. Yeah. But it happens in any business, not just in the entertainment business, even though the entertainment business might, be thought of as more on steroids in that area. So.
No, it's good advice. I mean, keep your friends and connections warm, whether you're working with them today or haven't been with them for 5 or 10 years. It's a good lesson.
If they were legitimate friends and not just business friends, those are not easy to find.
Yeah.
And so you should keep them. You never know what it's going to turn into, but what it will turn into is a continuing friendship.
Yeah.
How bad is that?
Well, and I can tell you firsthand, I mean, that's kind of one of the unspoken benefits of this show is I get to rub elbows and have a little bit of fairy dust rub off on me from all the amazing minds and guests that I have on the show. And so I think, if that statement of, you're the sum total of the people that you hang around, whether that's 5 or 500 people, then my game is leveling up slowly but surely.
Well, there's also, as long as we're going to throw cliches back and forth, people can tell an awful lot by who your friends are and who are the people that you hang out with. I've been married to the same woman for 35 years. She's my friend. And we don't have kids. So if you stay together for 35 years and you don't have kids, there's only one reason that you would stay together, because you want to. And, if you can have that not only in the partner that you're with, but with your friendships that you've built up over decades, I mean, what's better than that?
I can't say it any better. That's amazing. The one thing we haven't talked about is this partnership you have with Forbes, a publisher. It makes a lot of sense for obvious reasons, and it's very smart. Talk to us about what that deal looks like and kind of what your goals and objectives are going forward.
Well, look, you asked about white space. Where is it now? When I got into the podcasting business, there was white space everywhere. There wasn't a company like ours in the podcasting business. There wasn't a full service company that produces. I'm fond of saying that if somebody who ought to have a podcast walks in through our front door, deaf, dumb, blind, and with amnesia, we can have a podcast up in 48 hours, because we've got studios and writers and, guest bookers and what have you. It's probably a bit of an overstatement. But we can do it all. We're a 360-degree solution, but we have great partnerships. We have partnerships with Barstool Sports. They produce wonderful programming. We have a partnership with DirecTV, produces some wonderful programming that we have the podcast rights for. And I know that we have partnerships with a lot of other great partners. I love you all, even if I'm not mentioning your name. So that's also part of, you're known by the company you keep. Yeah. What brands do we have to sell to brands?
Yeah, it's smart. And I think the lesson maybe for marketers and other people who've got companies of all different sizes is this idea of collaboration or cross-pollination, right? So what you're basically doing with Forbes and vice versa is you're increasing your audience or cross-pollinating.
Right.
You're going where you are not before and where they have not been, and you're collaborating. And I think that's the key to, growing to scale, right?
Right. We did the first Forbes interview program a couple of weeks ago, and we put up the second Forbes interview program last week, and on the site, where you download that podcast, the second one's doing better than the first. Even though the guy in the second one probably doesn't reach a mass audience like Adam Carolla did, but since we promoted the Carolla interview on Carolla, and we also took the first interview program and replaced an episode of Carolla with that show, we let a lot of people know that that show existed. You know, we were looking for stickiness and the transfer of audience that you've been referring to, and the cross-pollination, which is an indication of why the second show, even if it isn't with Adam Carolla, is delivering a larger audience than Carolla delivered on the interview site. So, you know, and the power of Forbes to promote to their audience is just amazing.
Yeah, it's you know, just another channel for you to build audience. Right. So, you know, this is Norm's Act 2, and things are going well for you. What keeps you up at night now?
You know, I'm not exactly sure, even though I will tell you there are times when I will wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and know I'm not going back to sleep, you know. I think what keeps me up is nothing negative. What keeps me up is the energy and of all of the things that I do that I really enjoy doing, that sometimes it's tough to turn your brain off, you know. But in terms of what am I afraid of, you know, what keeps me up at night in terms of that, you know, these days it's closer to global thermonuclear war than it is what's going on in my business. You know, I've been around, you know, I'm 74 years old, so I've seen a lot of things, lived through a lot of periods, and, you know, the country is split in half, you know, and when the company is split in half and there are passionate advocates for both sides of issues, what I hope is that everybody will remember that we're all in this together and we either all survive or life won't be great. You know, I'm the chairman of the National Security Labs at Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore, so I'm very familiar what's going on with climate change, global warming, alternative forms of energy, and nuclear stockpiles stewardship. So every now and then one of those things pops into my mind, you know. It's not like I can do anything about it because I'm the chairman of the board that oversees them. Doesn't mean I make any decisions, but I know a lot of stuff that's going on. You know, I'm just committed to being involved in the things that I'm involved with that fortunately I enjoy doing, and you know, controlling the few things that I can control the best way I know how to do it, and not spend a lot of time worrying about things over which I have no control at all.
Well, I mean, you make a very good point. And, you know, you are a seasoned veteran. You've got experience. You've got the advantage of this hindsight of this amazing career. Norm, what is the secret to happiness? How do we do this thing? What's the secret sauce?
Well, look, you know, if I said that I hadn't had good fortune, you know, I would be lying. You know, it's sort of I remember somebody, and I don't know who it was, so I can't credit them. But it was the definition of luck, and the definition of luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Okay, if you can. It's not actually the preparation and the opportunity, it's the ability to recognize it and do something about it, you know? I mean, I remember my father talking about, well, you know, you could have bought this land, it was all bean fields, you could have bought it for 50 cents an acre. Well, he didn't do that, you know? So, and there's a lot of people who say, if I'd have done this, or if I'd have done that. So I don't worry about the things that I could have done that I didn't do. I worry about, well, or focus on the things that I can do and did do. And so, you know, if you've been successful in doing that, you have a right to be happy. And I've had a lot more of those than I've had the other things.